Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to show you how to draw a cat. So the first things you're going to need is a piece of paper. I like to use rowney Aquafine hot press paper. You could also use the Langton. If you do decide to colour the piece, I would definitely recommend a watercolour paper. You're going to need a mechanical pencil, some kind of rubber or eraser, and a ruler to kind of measure everything out. It doesn't need to be a ruler exactly, just something nice and long and flat and straight. Also get a piece of paper, a tracing paper, to draw on top of initially. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take the ruler and just place it underneath the cat's eye and then mark where that cat's eye ends. And then again over the top of the cat's eye and do a little mark, just a straight line, so it should be level with the top and bottom of the cat's eye from your reference photo. It is important that if you do this, that you print out your reference photo first and make sure it's the same size as your drawing paper. So both of these are A3. And then again with the ruler or a pencil, just mark the distance between the inner corner of the eye and the outer corner of the eye. I like to measure the inner corner of the eye from the edge of the paper to the inner corner of the eye, and then from the inner corner of the eye to the outer corner of the eye. So you can see I'm just using my pencil to kind of mark out that inner corner from the outer corner there. And here I'm just kind of seeing where the eye starts to curve up from that initial lowest point of the cat's eye. So you can see I'm marking out that lower point, and then I'm just doing quite harsh angles away from the bottom, curving around the cat's eye. So they don't need to be super curved. I like to actually do straight lines and then curve it round and make it nice and smooth after. So again, this is all drawn onto tracing paper, and then I'll transfer it eventually over onto my drawing paper. And again, just curving it round after I've marked all the initial angles. I like to kind of get the angles right before I flesh it out, so to speak. This is just the kind of very basic skeleton drawing, if you will. So I like to do this method because I find it makes my drawings really accurate. The more kind of practice I got with this method, the less I kind of had to actually do measuring, and the more it was kind of eyeballing where the lines went. And honestly, usually I just start with one eye and then I kind of measure out from the one eye, and I usually have my reference photo on a laptop, but it's much easier to kind of show the method with a printed out reference photo. And then once I'm kind of happy with my lines, I can go over them and make them a little bit darker and more pronounced, but I like to keep them quite light for as long as possible because it's much easier to rub out. And then I'm kind of just drawing kind of the eye line where the eye kind of comes out, and you get that tiny little bit of like where the eyelashes would be on a person, that kind of little area. And here I'm just measuring the pupil from the outer corner of the eye and the inner corner of the eye. And then the bottom of the pupil as well. So again, as you get more practice, you don't really need to measure it out this precisely, but I find it definitely helps to build that skill. I used to kind of just like freehand everything and not measure it as much, but my drawings were a lot less accurate then, so I like to, yeah, measure certain areas out when I can, because it does really help. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm picking a point where I want to measure from, and then that point is where I put my thumb, and then the point that I'm measuring to is where the end of the pencil is. So I can move my thumb and the pencil to adjust where I want that point to be. But for example, if I want to measure from the pupil to the inner corner of the eye, I'd put the pencil on the inner corner of the eye and my thumb on the iris. I think that's what I said. Yeah, the pupil. Sorry, the pupil. So yeah, that's how I use my finger and pencil to measure distances. And that's why I said you don't really need a ruler, it's just a lot longer and flatter than a pencil, so it can help a little bit more. But yeah, I just use my pencil or pen. So here I like to, like I said before, I like to kind of measure everything else from the point of the eye. So I'm taking my pencil, measuring the inner corner to the inner corner of the other eye. Some bits you won't be able to see me do on the cat, but you'll see me do on the drawing, just because it's not in the camera unfortunately. But yeah, I'm just measuring now the inner corner to the outer corner of the eye. And this is the furthest part from both points. So that's why I kind of like to do really long lines, because you don't know where that outer corner will actually start and end, if that makes sense. And again, same thing I did with the first eye, measuring the top half and the bottom half. And again, this is the lowest point, just straight across. And then I can measure out where the bottom actually connects to the eye, because obviously the whole eye isn't square. You do need to kind of make those angles to make it a nice round almond shape. Okay, so here I hope you can see what I explained before. You can see how I'm not drawing like straight across, I'm kind of doing the little angles to the lowest point of the eye. So that is where I believe the lowest point of the eye is, and then I'm curving it round. So yeah, the whole eye won't touch that line that we made, but that is the lowest that the eye can go. If you take your eye further than that line, then that eye is too big, because that is the line that you've made that says this is the lowest part. And again, when I need to, just measuring it out, so I'm measuring out that pupil. It was roughly the size of the rubber on the end of the pencil. But yours might be different, so make sure you measure it out. And again, as you become more practiced in this method, you really don't need to measure out every single detail, but it certainly helps at the start to keep your drawing nice and accurate. Okay, so this next part might look a little bit weird, but basically when I was studying cats, like I like to look at my own cats and study how their anatomy works, and I also studied cartoon cats when I first started drawing them, and I noticed that they had this kind of U shape. I noticed it especially in Lion King, but they had this kind of U shape or a V shape that connected the eye to the nose. So it was the top of the eye straight down to the nose and then back up, and it was kind of like a U shape, but the top of it was curved around to make the eye. So that's how I kind of see that shape, and it shows that the eye kind of has a invisible line that connects to the nose and back up. So we can use that shape when we're drawing cats. So I measured the eye to the nose, and then I saw that line that went down, and then measured both sides of the end of the nose. And then again, I measured how far down the nose went with my pencil and marked that off. So hopefully when you've blocked your nose in, you can see that weird shape I was talking about that goes down. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit repetitive now. You're just doing a lot of measuring, and as you build up more features, you can measure more features out, so we can then measure the sides of the face and the ears and the mouth, and for any markings and stuff we can use this method to try and make our drawings as accurate as possible. So this is actually a similar method that you get taught if you ever do live drawing. If you've ever done live drawing before, you might see this method and you kind of hold your pencil out as far stretched out as you can and use your pencil to measure points of the subject that you're drawing. So we're just taking this method and transferring it onto a 2D drawing, and that's why it's kind of important to have your reference printed out the same size as your drawing. Again, as you become more practiced, you can kind of eyeball it, and I like to use my laptop to reference from on my iPad, but I would recommend starting with a printed out picture if you're not super confident with this method. And here again you can just see me outlining all the little details of the nose now, using the measuring method first and then filling in any details. And I'm not going to add too much detail at this stage because I am going to transfer it over to my normal drawing paper. And again, just measuring the points of the face using my ruler and my pencil to make sure I get the kind of accurate line that I want. And again, this should be kind of your lowest point on that certain feature. So for mine it was the mouth where it kind of ends, and now I'm doing the little cheek areas, I'm not too sure what they're called, where the whiskers are, and again that should be the lowest point. They were actually not level, so I had to do 2 different points for each side of the face. And then I'm just double checking it with my pencil. So that you can kind of see how one side is just a little bit higher up than the other one. And then for this part I'm kind of taking a point on the face, so I picked the eye and measuring where the cheek is in reference to the eye. So on the left side it was kind of the outer corner, on the right side it was the pupil. So that's how far out the face cheeks should go. I will eventually learn what that part of the cat is called. And then again, just doing those little angles, angling out a rough shape of that feature of the cat's face. And trying not to go past those little guidelines that I made, but just fleshing it out a little bit. And again, just erasing or rubbing out any little areas that I'm not super happy with, I like to use my electric rubber for this part because it's just a little bit smaller and more accurate than any of the larger rubber that I have. So we're starting to get a little bit more of a cat face. It does look a little bit odd, I'm not gonna lie, this isn't the best looking cat right now, but it does start to come together at the end. I do much prefer doing the grid method because I can kind of add shading and more detail as I go with the grid method. This bit is a little bit more time consuming, and yeah, there's more additional steps that I can kind of cover up with the grid method, if that makes sense. But I think it's important to kind of learn these techniques. When you do any kind of art, you should have a good, not should, but it's always nice to have a good like drawing foundation to work from. So you can kind of see the cat's face starting to take shape now. And here you can't really see because unfortunately my camera was off, but you can see I'm just measuring out where the ear should go. So this is the inner part of the ear. And then again, I think I do the same thing. I think I do it for the top of the ear and then the side of the ear. Yeah, so just measuring out how far that ear should go out in reference to the outer corner of the eye, I think, or the inner corner. And here I'm just measuring the top of the ear. And you can kind of pick any different point you want to measure from. These are just the points I like to measure from. But so long as you pick a point and you stick to that point, you can't really go too far wrong. I did make a mistake with my first one and I picked kind of the corner of the paper. But then I ended up changing that point at a different stage, and because I changed the point that I was measuring from, the cat was a little bit too long in the face. But when I tried it again and I made sure to measure from the same point, it stayed nice and accurate. So there is quite a bit of freehanding involved, not a lot of it is measuring, like the angles of the ear and the face and such. And again, you'll see later on that I like to also kind of add what I call an underpainting, but it's really more of a sketchy line art. And that's where a little bit more kind of loose freehanding comes in, rather than just this tight measuring method. So now you can see that the cat's ear is definitely starting to take shape now. We're starting to get a little bit more of a base going. I always think that cat's eyes do look quite high up, but if you do look at the cat, you can actually see that her eyes do start kind of in the middle of her head. So she does look like she has quite a large forehead, but that's just how this cat looks, and I think how most cats look, to be fair. So yeah, don't worry if it's like your ears look like they're too high up. That's just how it looks. So yeah, hopefully as you get more confident with this method, you can kind of use the tools a lot less, but please don't be scared of using any tools. They're there to be used and utilised. They're available to everyone, so if you choose to use them or not, that's totally up to you. It's your personal preference. This is just how I like to work, I guess, and yeah, I kind of don't need to use the measuring quite as much now, but it's there if I ever need to use it. And here I think I'm just measuring the top of the ear, the very tip, to the cat's outer eye. So you can see it's really not that detailed at the moment. There's no shading. We've got kind of very messy shapes. It's really kind of just an outline jotting down where everything goes, but that's completely fine because it is on tracing paper and I will transfer it later. So if I did a lot of detail on this layer, then I'd have to redo all of it again on the drawing paper. Now if you don't intend to colour the piece, you don't really need to do this step, to be fair. You could just draw straight onto the paper, but I would still recommend drawing on a scrap piece of paper first, just because then it's a lot easier to move it over. So yeah, I find if you draw on a scrap piece of paper first, if you make any mistakes or you find that you've made too many lines and too harsh, if you do it on a scrap piece of paper, you can easily just transfer it over onto another piece of drawing paper and you don't have to take all those grid lines or whatever lines you want to call them. And another reason I like to use a tracing paper to start off with is when you kind of, before you transfer it, you can go over your drawing again and make sure that it's completely accurate, you're completely happy with it. And if not, you can just draw over those lines and change them. And it's not going to affect your final drawing because it's just a tracing paper. And then you can transfer over all of the lines that you are actually happy with. Okay, so when doing the neck, I'm not going to kind of go into too much detail. Honestly, this bit is kind of eyeballed, but only because cat fur falls different, like kind of differently every time. It doesn't fall in the same place, especially for not as long as this. So making those clumps of fur accurate isn't really that important compared to the features. So I'm not going to really go into too much detail on the cat fur at this stage, just because yeah, it changes. So if yours looks different to mine, that's fine. But yeah, that is mostly the cat finished, so I'm just jotting in her markings, kind of eyeballing this based off the measurements that we've already made. I'm quite happy with how it looks, but I will check how accurate my drawing is over my photo, and because it's on tracing paper, it's really quite easy to do so. And this is another great tool that you can do. You can do this by just taking a photo of your drawing and putting it in something like Photoshop and changing the opacity so you can see how accurate your drawing is compared to the reference photo. Okay, so this is now transferred. I'm not going to kind of show this step because it's a bit boring. Basically all I did was I finalised my lines with a red pencil and then did a grey pencil on the bottom and on the back of the paper, and then taped it down with a pen. I drew over all of those red lines, and then that's kind of how it transferred over. You can use, I can't remember what it's called, graphite paper, transfer paper I think it's called, but I like to use the pencils that I'm going to use for the portrait anyway, sorry. So they're water soluble pencils, and that is how I do my line arts, my grids, my transfers. I use watercolour pencils to do that. And the reason I use these pencils is simply because when wet they blend back into the portrait, so they're not going to ever stay as really harsh lines or anything like that. And I picked, I think it was sepia 10%, because it's a colour that blends really well into white but also black. Now this is the part of line work that I like the most, is where you can kind of flesh it out, add a little bit more shading. This is what I call it underpainting. But honestly it's not quite as detailed as a normal underpainting is. And yeah, I'm just kind of fleshing out all of those areas. Again, you can't see my reference photo as well, but I am referring to my reference photo, just looking over at it and then looking back at my drawing and making lines as I see fit. And kind of how much work you have to do on the underpainting really depends on the reference photo. So because she's quite a fluffy cat, she didn't really need too much work compared to like the tiger piece that I did recently. There was a lot of stripes involved in that and a lot of foliage, whereas she's quite simple and very loose with the underpainting. And here I'm just marking down my highlights. I don't always fill in the eye. Sometimes I find it better to fill in the eye as I use the colours, but for this eye I decided to jot down those highlights first. And again, you can completely skip this step if you want to. Some people do prefer just have the real basic features in. It can be a little bit of a time consuming method to go in again and kind of redraw everything for it to just be coloured over, but that's just how I like to do it. There's no right or wrong way, but I do like getting in my kind of highlights and shadows before I colour over the top. So you can see I'm just making parts like the eye, like where the eyelashes are, just a little bit thicker, so that would be a darker colour when I come to colouring it in. Okay, so I did actually decide to speed this part up just because it can be a little bit repetitive and there's not really too much more explaining that I can do that I've not already said. So yeah, this is how I kind of finish off the drawing process, with a nice little underpainting line art type of thing. Yeah, it's just marking down all the shadows and any details that I think are important, like the highlights of the eyes. This is where I also kind of like to get a rough fur direction, but mostly all of the shadows that I think are important to note down. Yeah, I do this in water-soluble coloured pencil, so it blends into the drawing quite nicely, but that's really it for this part of the drawing. I hope you liked it and I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you found it useful, and if you create anything from any of my videos, please let me know and tag me in it on social media. I would love to see it and hopefully share it around. But yeah, I really hope you found this useful and I'd love to see anything you do. If you have any questions, please let me know. Yeah, there's not really too much more to say about this part of the process, unfortunately. If you do have any more questions, maybe I can make another video elaborating it, and if you'd like to see how I do the grid method or any other methods, please let me know. But yeah, I think that's kind of it really for this video. Yeah. Sorry. I hope you like it, and yeah, I hope you found it enjoyable. If you could subscribe, I'd really appreciate it, and leave a comment. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Right, bye.